A U.S. Marine found a German Shepherd puppy barely breathing beside an old shed. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. He wasn't supposed to find anything alive out here. Staff Sergeant Caleb Warren had only stopped because the evening wind carried a sound too fragile to ignore, a thin rasp that didn't belong to the rustling weeds or the old wooden boards trembling in the breeze. The abandoned shed stood crooked beneath a fading sky, its tin roof creaking softly, giving off the scent of dust and old pine warmed by the last touch of sunlight. Caleb stepped closer, boots pressing into dry leaves that whispered underfoot. Something in the air shifted, an instinct he had learned to trust long before he ever wore a uniform. He crouched near the corner of the shed, letting the stillness settle. There, half hidden in the shadow where the light couldn't quite reach, lay a tiny German Shepherd puppy. Barely the size of Caleb's forearm. Its chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths, each one slower than the last. The pup's fur was damp with cold dew, clinging to thin ribs that pulsed like faint wings under his skin. No wounds. No signs of harm. Just a body losing its fight against the chill creeping in with the coming night. Caleb's breath caught, subtle but sharp. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, voice low, steady, meant for fragile things. The puppy didn't lift its head. Only a small tremor flickered through its paw, the kind of movement that wasn't strength, but the body's last attempt to stay. The Marine slipped one hand beneath the tiny frame. The cold was startling, like holding a stone left overnight in the mountain air. He brought the puppy close against his chest, letting his jacket wrap around the trembling body. "You're not giving up today," he whispered, more vow than comfort. A faint hum escaped the pup, hardly a sound at all, but enough to make Caleb still. Enough to make him believe there was a spark left. The sun dipped lower, brushing the world in muted gold. Caleb rose slowly, careful not to jostle the fragile creature. As he carried the puppy toward his truck, the wind shifted again, warmer this time, as if the land itself had exhaled in relief. And for a moment, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in a long while, hope, small and trembling, but alive. Like the pup pressed against his heartbeat. Caleb eased the truck onto the narrow road leading toward town, one hand steady on the wheel while the other kept the small bundle pressed securely against his chest. The heater worked hard, humming low as warm air drifted over the puppy wrapped inside his jacket. The little body shivered with fading tremors, each movement so slight it felt like a breath against his ribs. Caleb kept glancing down, measuring each fragile rise of the pup's chest. The world outside the windshield dimmed into soft evening blues, the kind of fading light that made every shadow stretch long and quiet. Old fence posts flickered past, their silhouettes softened by the glow of the truck's headlights. The scent of dust and warm engine oil filled the cab, familiar and grounding. Caleb spoke without thinking, his voice a low murmur meant more for comfort than conversation. "You just hold on. We are almost there." For a moment, the puppy stirred, a faint sound slipping out, not quite a whine, but something that felt like recognition. Caleb's throat tightened. He had seen that kind of wool before, in places where hope was sometimes no more than a thin thread clung to out of instinct. He pulled into the small gravel lot of the nearest veterinary clinic, its porch light glowing a muted amber against the darkening sky. The sign above the door flickered with a tired buzz, as if struggling to stay awake. Caleb stepped out carefully, cradling the puppy so close that the warmth of his breath brushed across the pup's head. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and cedar shavings. A soft chime sounded when he pushed open the door. The receptionist, a woman in her early 50s with gentle eyes, looked up immediately. Caleb did not need to explain. One look at the limp shape in his arms and she hurried toward the back, calling for the veterinarian. Minutes stretched. Thin. Caleb paced slowly, his boots whispering across the tile floor, every step matched to the fragile rhythm of the pup's breathing. When the veterinarian arrived, a calm man with silver at his temples, he examined the puppy with hands steady from years of practice. His expression softened with concern. Severe cold exposure, he said quietly. Dehydration. He is fighting, but it is going to be a close night. Caleb nodded once, jaw firm, holding his composure like he had been trained to do when things went dark. The veterinarian carried the pup gently toward the treatment room. Just before the door closed, the puppy turned his head the slightest bit, as if searching for the warmth he had been held in. Caleb stood still, the air around him humming with the soft buzz of lights and the distant rhythm of machines. A quiet settled over him, deep and steady, the kind of silence that comes when a man realizes he is responsible for a life that cannot speak, cannot ask, cannot defend itself. He whispered under his breath, "I am right here, little guy. You are not alone." And in that moment, with the door closing softly between them, it felt less like a promise he made to the puppy, and more like a promise the puppy had already made to him. The treatment room door gave a soft click as it closed, leaving Caleb alone in the dim waiting area where the lights hummed with a gentle insistence. He sat only for a moment before rising again, unable to keep still. His hands, usually so steady, felt hollow without the small weight they had carried for miles. He moved toward the window, watching the night settle over the quiet street outside. A thin layer of frost had begun to form on the parked cars, catching the glow of the street lamp in pale glimmers. The world out there continued on, unaware of the fragile life fighting for breath just beyond the door. The veterinarian returned after several minutes, his expression calm but serious. "We have him on warm fluids and gentle heat," he said softly. "His temperature is very low, but he responded faintly when we placed him on the warming pad." Caleb nodded, absorbing each word like a man gripping the edge of something he refuses to let slip away. "Can I stay?" he asked. The veterinarian gave a slow nod. "You can sit right outside. He will hear you if you speak. Sometimes that helps." Caleb settled into a chair near the treatment room door, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. The faint sound of machines drifted through the thin wall, steady and reassuring in their rhythm. The air smelled of cedar and gentle antiseptic, a scent that somehow reminded him of early mornings on base, when the world felt quiet and honest. He closed his eyes and let the memories drift. He remembered missions where silence felt like a second skin, where listening closely often meant the difference between life and loss. He remembered the faces of men who had trusted him, and the weight of carrying their hopes when circumstances grew dark. And now, strangely, he felt that same weight for a creature no larger than his two hands. "You just keep fighting," he murmured, knowing the pup could not see him but hoping the sound carried through the thin wall. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time blurred into a soft haze. Then a sound met his ears, so faint he almost dismissed it. A small whimper. Not distressed, not pained. Just a sound of presence. Caleb leaned closer to the door, heart tight. Another tiny sound followed, like a breath catching and trying again. The veterinarian stepped back out moments later, a small smile easing the lines around his eyes. "He made a little noise," Caleb said, barely above a whisper. The veterinarian nodded. "Yes. It is a good sign. Not a guarantee, but a sign he is still trying." Caleb exhaled slowly, a breath he had been holding without realizing it. Hope settled into him again, fragile but steady, the way dawn settles before light touches the horizon. He rested his hand gently against the treatment room door, feeling the faint hum of warmth coming from inside. "I am right here," he whispered. "As long as it takes." The night deepened, quiet and wide, holding them both in its patient embrace. The hours slipped into the quiet stretch of early morning, the kind of stillness where even the hum of overhead lights felt softer, gentler, as if the building itself understood how fragile the moment was. Caleb sat exactly where he had been, his back straight but not tense, his eyes fixed on the narrow window of the treatment room. Every so often he leaned forward, listening for the faint rhythm of breath or machine. The receptionist had offered him coffee twice, but he hardly noticed the cup cooling in his hands. What mattered was behind that door, wrapped in warming blankets and fighting a quiet battle no one could fight for him. A thin glow began to edge along the horizon outside the clinic, brushing soft gray across the frosted windows. Dawn was approaching, slow and patient. Caleb felt the shift in the air, the way a new day crept in with a promise too small to name. The veterinarian stepped out again, his expression thoughtful but no longer weighed down by uncertainty. "He is holding steady," the man said gently. "His breathing has evened a bit. He is still very weak, but he is responding to the warmth." Caleb nodded once, feeling the muscles in his shoulders ease. "Can I see him?" he asked. The veterinarian hesitated for just a heartbeat, then motioned him inside. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp near the counter. The puppy lay curled on a soft towel, tiny chest rising in slow but steady breaths. His fur, once chilled and damp, now held a faint shimmer where the light touched it. Caleb approached with careful steps, as if afraid his presence alone might disrupt the fragile calm. He knelt beside the table, resting his hand lightly on the edge. The pup's ear flickered at the movement, an almost imperceptible response, but enough to catch Caleb's breath. "Hey, little guy," he whispered. "You are doing good." The veterinarian adjusted a small tube delivering warm fluids, nodding approvingly at the pup's improving posture. "He is responding to familiar voices," he said, almost quietly. "It helps." Caleb remained by his side, the hours blurring into a gentle rhythm of watching, listening, and offering soft words that seemed to settle the air. The puppy shifted once, a small stretch of his paw as if reaching toward the warmth he recognized from earlier. Caleb carefully cupped his hands around the tiny paws without touching, creating a shelter of warmth in the space between them. The pup's breathing steadied again, a soft exhale that sounded almost like trust. Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke across the parking lot, catching on the frost and turning it into a field of tiny stars. The light spilled through the window and settled across the table, warming the towel and brushing the pup's fur with a faint glow. Caleb watched the small rise and fall of the puppy's chest, feeling something inside him loosen, something he had carried far too long. Hope, quiet and steady, rising with the morning. He whispered, barely audible, "You keep fighting, and I will stay right here." The pup's tiny ear twitched once more, as if answering. Morning settled fully over the small clinic, warming the walls in soft gold and stretching quiet beams across the tile floor. Caleb stayed beside the table, his presence steady as the pup's breathing found a fragile rhythm. The veterinarian stepped out briefly, leaving the room wrapped in the hush of early daylight. Caleb leaned in, watching the tiny rise and fall beneath the blankets, each breath like a promise the small body was trying its best to keep. The puppy shifted slightly, a small sound escaping him, thin but clear, as if he was testing his own voice. Caleb's eyes softened. "There you are," he whispered. "I knew you were still in there." He rested his arms on the edge of the table, letting the heat of the lamp spill across his hands. The scent of warmed towels and gentle antiseptic mixed with the faint smell of fur, creating a kind of quiet sanctuary around them. Outside, a snow-dusted wind brushed the windows, but inside the room the air felt calm, almost tender. The veterinarian returned with a clipboard, though he did not look at it immediately. Instead, he watched the small creature curled into the towel. "He is not out of danger," he said softly, "but he has turned a corner. Some pups give up when the cold takes hold. This one seems to want to stay." Caleb nodded, unable to look away from the tiny form that had fought so hard through the night. "He did not quit," he said quietly. "Not once." The veterinarian smiled with a gentle understanding. Sometimes they respond to the person who finds them. It is not something we can measure, but I have seen it before. Caleb considered that, letting the word settle. He had seen it too, in different forms. The way a steady voice or a familiar presence could pull someone back from the edge, even when logic insisted there was no way forward. He lowered a finger to the edge of the towel. The puppy's nose twitched, and he nudged weakly toward the warmth, guided not by strength, but by instinct. Caleb felt the faintest brush of the tiny muzzle against his knuckle, a gesture so small it could have been missed if he had blinked. But he felt it. And it moved something deep inside him, something that had been dimmed by distance, deployments, and the quiet ache of things left unsaid. "You are fighting," he murmured. "I am proud of you." The veterinarian adjusted one of the tubes and stepped back. "He will need rest and warmth for the next several hours," he said. "And he will need someone familiar nearby." Caleb met his eyes, understanding the unspoken question. "I am staying," he said simply. The veterinarian nodded and left them again. Caleb pulled a chair closer, settling into the warm glow cast by the lamp. He watched as the puppy inched closer to the towel's edge, curling instinctively toward the pocket of heat nearest to Caleb's hand. A small sigh left the pup, the kind of sound a body makes when it decides, finally, to trust the world again. Caleb felt it all the way through him. He rested his palm gently on the table, close enough for the pup to sense, but careful not to disturb. "You are not alone anymore," he whispered, letting the quiet carry the truth. In the peaceful stillness of that small room, something new began to take root, fragile as dawn but just as real. The morning deepened into a gentle mid-morning calm, the kind that softened the edges of the clinic and wrapped every sound in a quiet hush. Caleb remained in the chair beside the table, his posture steady but relaxed now, as if his own heartbeat had begun to align with the slow rise and fall of the small chest before him. The puppy had curled more tightly into the blanket, his tiny body no longer cold to the touch, warmed by the lamp and by hours of quiet persistence. A subtle shift in the air drew Caleb's attention. The pup stretched one paw outward, barely grazing the edge of the towel. It was a small effort, almost timid, but it carried something unmistakable, intent. Caleb leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Easy, little guy. Take your time." The puppy's eyes fluttered, not fully opening but moving beneath the lids as if they were trying to remember the world around them. His breath wavered once, then steadied again, each inhale a touch stronger than the last. A soft sigh escaped him, warm and fragile. The veterinarian stepped in quietly, observing from the doorway. "This is a very good sign," he said. "He is beginning to recognize warmth and familiar presence." Caleb nodded, his focus still locked on the small creature. There was a softness in the pup's breathing now, a rhythm that felt less like struggle and more like surrender to safety. Minutes passed in a gentle drift. The veterinarian adjusted one of the blankets and checked the pup's temperature. "He is rising slowly," he murmured. "Still delicate, but moving in the right direction." Caleb watched every movement, feeling a quiet kind of gratitude settle deep in his chest. The pup shifted again, this time with more intention. His tiny head nudged forward, pressing gently toward the space where Caleb's hand rested on the table. It was not much, just a small gesture, but it carried the weight of everything he had fought through the night to hold on to. Caleb moved his hand closer, still careful not to touch. The warmth of his presence alone seemed to anchor the pup, who let out a faint, breathy hum. It felt almost like recognition, or maybe relief. The veterinarian smiled softly. "Some animals attach very quickly to the one who finds them. It is not something we train. It is something they choose." Caleb absorbed the words, letting them settle somewhere deep, somewhere worn from years of protecting others but rarely allowing himself to feel protected in return. The pup's breathing continued its quiet improvement, each inhale a little smoother, each exhale a little stronger. The early chill from outside no longer clung to his fur. Instead, he seemed wrapped entirely in warmth, drawn toward the calm that Caleb brought into the room. The sun climbed higher, spilling a gentle glow across the table and painting the pup's fur in soft amber. Caleb felt the moment settle around him like a fragile gift. "You keep choosing to stay," he whispered. "I am right here." The puppy's ear twitched once more, a tiny spark of life answering back. By early afternoon, the quiet of the clinic had settled into a gentle rhythm, the kind that wrapped itself around the room like a warm blanket. Caleb remained close to the table, his presence steady and calm as the puppy continued to rest. The tiny body, once chilled and barely responsive, now carried a faint but unmistakable spark. Every slow breath, every small shift beneath the blanket hinted that something fragile was beginning to take hold. The veterinarian stepped in again, checking the pup's temperature with practiced hands. "He is climbing slowly," the man said, relief softening his voice. "Not fast, but steady. That is exactly what we want." Caleb nodded, watching as the veterinarian adjusted the lamp to cast its glow more evenly over the small frame. When the door clicked shut again, the room fell into a peaceful stillness. The puppy stirred, a soft rustling beneath the blanket, and for the first time his eyes opened just the slightest bit. Not fully, not with strength, but a flutter that carried the weight of a creature trying to return to the world. Caleb leaned in, his breath catching as the pup's gaze drifted toward him. The eyes were cloudy with exhaustion, yet they seemed to sense something familiar. "Hey," Caleb whispered, the word gentle as a breeze. "There you are." The pup blinked slowly, his tiny nose twitching as if searching for the warmth he remembered. Caleb moved his hand closer to the edge of the towel, careful and deliberate. The puppy inched toward the warmth, his weak movements guided more by instinct than strength. He nudged the air, brushing his tiny muzzle against Caleb's knuckle before settling again. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt like a declaration. He knew the voice, he knew the scent, and he trusted them. Outside, the light shifted as clouds drifted over the sun, casting soft shadows across the clinic floor. The glow from the lamp remained constant, a small oasis of warmth in the room. Caleb stayed exactly where he was, not daring to break the quiet connection growing inch by fragile inch between them. A faint sound escaped the puppy, a breathy hum that wavered like a broken note trying to form. It was not a cry. It was not distress. It was simply presence, a small affirmation that he was still here, still trying. Caleb felt something settle in him, something deep and steady. "You are doing so well," he murmured. "Just keep going." The veterinarian returned with a small syringe of warm electrolytes. "Let us try a tiny amount," he said. With careful precision, he let a drop touch the pup's tongue. The puppy swallowed weakly, then again, the motion slow but deliberate. "Good," the veterinarian whispered. "That is very good." Caleb watched, hope swelling quietly in his chest. The puppy's breathing smoothed again, softer now, more rhythmic, as if his body was beginning to remember how to hold life instead of letting it slip away. When the veterinarian stepped out once more, Caleb leaned closer, letting his presence fill the quiet. The pup's tiny ear twitched, that same small spark answering him again. And in that gentle room, with only a lamp and a marine keeping vigil, the smallest miracle continued to unfold, breath by fragile breath. Afternoon light softened into a gentle haze as the hours moved quietly forward, wrapping the small clinic in a calm that felt almost sacred. Caleb remained by the table, the steady presence that the tiny pup seemed to anchor himself to. The lamp above cast a warm circle of light that brushed the puppy's fur in faint gold, the kind of glow that made every small movement feel like a fragile victory. The puppy stirred again, this time with more intention. His eyes fluttered open for a longer moment, unfocused but undeniably alive. Caleb leaned in, his breath steady and soft. "You are doing great," he murmured, letting the gentle rhythm of his voice fill the space between them. The pup blinked slowly, then let out a weak sound that trembled in the air. It was not strong, but it carried a note of recognition that reached directly into Caleb's chest. The veterinarian entered quietly, watching the tiny creature make another small effort to adjust his position. "His body is beginning to stabilize," he said. "This is the part where we wait for him to decide if he wants to keep going." Caleb nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the pup who continued to breathe through each fragile moment. The veterinarian adjusted the warming lamp and gave a small nod of approval. "He is fighting. That is all we can ask for today." When he left the room again, the silence settled in a way that felt both delicate and deep. Caleb sat back down, folding his hands over his knees. The puppy shifted. Once more, reaching his nose toward the familiar warmth nearby. Caleb moved his hand closer, stopping just short of touching the tiny muzzle. The pup's breathing steadied in response, a faint exhale that felt like a whispered promise. Then, as the minutes drifted by, the fragile rhythm faltered. It was small at first, almost easy to miss. A breath a bit too shallow. A pause slightly too long. Caleb's posture straightened, his eyes narrowing with quiet concern. "Come on," he whispered softly. "Stay with me." The puppy tried to inhale again, his tiny chest trembling with the effort. His eyes, which had been half open, began to drift closed. The warmth of the lamp remained steady, but the little body beneath it seemed to waver. Caleb leaned closer, lowering his voice to a gentle murmur meant to guide, not to command. "I am right here," he said. "Do not drift too far. You have come too far to let go now." The pup's ear twitched faintly, as if the sound reached him through layers of exhaustion. For a moment, the fragile rise of his chest steadied again, then faltered once more. The veterinarian stepped back into the room, drawn by the shift in the machine's soft beeping. He glanced at the pup and then at Caleb, his expression calm but somber. "He is struggling," he said quietly. "Sometimes this happens before they turn a corner, and sometimes it happens before they fade." Caleb felt the words settle heavily in the air, but he did not move away. Instead, he lowered his voice even further, letting each word land with deliberate gentleness. "Little guy," he whispered, "I need you to stay. Just breathe. I am not leaving you." The pup's chest trembled with one more shallow breath, a fragile whisper of life suspended between staying and slipping away. And in that still room, held by warmth and quiet faith, the world seemed to pause with him. For a long, suspended moment, the room held its breath with the tiny life on the table. The soft hum of the warming lamp, the rhythm of the clinic lights, the muted ticking of a wall clock somewhere down the hall, everything felt distant, as if the world had stepped back to give the small creature space to choose. Caleb leaned closer, his palms resting on the edge of the table, his voice low and steady. "Do not quit, little one. Not now." The puppy lay still, his tiny chest barely rising beneath the edge of the blanket. His breaths were faint, stretched thin between effort and exhaustion. The veterinarian adjusted a dial gently, whispering something meant to soothe as much as to monitor. But the pup's small body trembled once, then settled into a stillness that made the air grow heavy. Caleb's breath caught as he watched the pup's eyelids drift shut fully, the fragile flicker of awareness fading behind them. It felt as though the warmth in the room dimmed, even though the lamp continued to glow. The veterinarian placed a hand on the table beside the pup, his expression softened by years of seeing moments just like this. "He may be slipping," he said quietly. "Sometimes they reach a limit their bodies cannot push past." The word settled over the room like a veil, gentle but unyielding. Caleb lowered his head for a moment, eyes closed, drawing in a slow, steady breath. When he spoke again, his voice carried something deeper, something quiet and resolute. "I am here," he whispered. "You are not going alone." He slid one hand a little closer, stopping just shy of touching the small, fragile form. His presence alone seemed to stir the air around the pup, as if the warmth of loyalty itself reached across the tiny space. Then, through the stillness, a sound broke, so faint, so small, it almost disappeared into the hum of the lamp. A thin, shaky exhale, followed by another. Caleb lifted his head, eyes fixed on the tiny chest. It rose, barely, unevenly, but undeniably. The veterinarian leaned in, surprise flickering across his face as he checked the pup's temperature again. His breathing, it is trying to stabilize, he murmured. The puppy's ear twitched, the softest tremor, like a signal reaching through layers of exhaustion. Caleb exhaled slowly, as if releasing the weight that had pressed against him all morning. "That is it," he whispered. "Come back." The pup's eyes did not open, but his tiny body responded with another shallow breath, then another. Not strong. Not certain. But present. The veterinarian adjusted the warm fluids again, his voice a hush. Sometimes they find one last pocket of strength. It can mean they are fighting their way back. Caleb watched the movement of that small chest, each rise like the faint glow of an ember buried deep beneath ash. "Stay with me," he said quietly, not pleading, not commanding, but offering something like a promise. The puppy's breathing steadied just a little more, still fragile, still wavering, but carrying a spark that had not been there moments before. And in the soft hush of the clinic, surrounded by warm light and quiet hope, that spark refused to go out. The faint breaths that had wavered on the edge of silence began to steady, each inhale a little more certain than the last. The veterinarian adjusted the warm fluids once more, his movements gentle, careful not to break the fragile rhythm returning to the small creature on the table. Caleb leaned in, his eyes fixed on the tiny rise and fall beneath the blanket. "That is it," he whispered, letting his voice drift like a soft breeze, steady and reassuring. The puppy, still too weak to open his eyes, stirred faintly at the sound. His small paw twitched, brushing the towel as if testing the edges of the world again. The lamp's warm glow wrapped him in a soft halo, turning the moment into something quiet and sacred. The veterinarian offered a slow nod. "His breathing pattern is improving. It is not strong, but it is consistent. That is a very promising shift." Caleb released a breath he felt as though he had been holding since dawn. The air in the room seemed lighter now, touched with something close to hope. He moved his hand just a little closer, leaving enough space so the pup could reach if he wanted. A few moments passed before the tiny body shifted toward the warmth, nudging the air with his nose until he found the familiar presence he had clung to all night. The touch was no more than a whisper, the faint brush of fur against skin, but it carried the weight of a miracle. Caleb felt the connection settle deep in his chest, quiet and warm. "You came back," he murmured. Outside, sunlight broke through the thinning clouds, stretching across the frosted window and spilling soft gold over the clinic floor. Dust motes drifted through the beam, moving slowly, as if time itself had chosen to go gently for the sake of the small life on the table. The veterinarian checked the pup's temperature again, his smile faint but real. "He is responding well. If he continues like this for the next hour, he has a real chance." Caleb nodded, gratitude tightening his throat. "He has fought this far," he said softly. "He is not done." The pup let out a tiny sound, almost a sigh, the kind of soft exhale that spoke of effort and exhaustion but also of relief. The warmth of the lamp washed over him, and his breathing steadied even more, finding a rhythm that felt purposeful instead of desperate. Caleb leaned closer, lowering his voice to a murmur meant for the pup alone. "You rest now. I am right here." The small creature shifted again, curling into the blanket with a sense of comfort that had not been there before. His body, once still and fragile, now held a hint of warmth returning to his paws and ears. The veterinarian stepped back to give them space, his expression thoughtful. "It is always remarkable," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Sometimes all they need is warmth, time, and someone who refuses to give up." Caleb kept his gaze on the tiny form, his voice soft with certainty. "He is not alone anymore." In the hush of that small room, with sunlight rising and hope settling into the corners like a gentle tide, the fragile spark of life grew stronger, breath by breath. The quiet strength returning to the puppy's breaths continued to build in small, steady waves, each one a little fuller than the last. Afternoon sunlight drifted through the window, creating soft patterns on the clinic floor, as if the day itself had begun to breathe easier alongside the tiny creature on the table. Caleb stayed close, elbows resting on the edge, his voice low and steady whenever the puppy stirred. "You keep going," he murmured, letting the warmth in his tone guide the moment. The pup responded with a faint shift of his paws, a tiny stretch as if he was rediscovering the comfort of warmth and the presence that had carried him through the long night. The veterinarian entered again, checking the small readings and the color returning beneath the pup's fur. "He is doing exceptionally well for what he was facing," he said softly. "Most do not pull back from the edge once they slip that far. But he did." Caleb nodded, eyes never leaving the pup. "He fought every minute." The veterinarian smiled gently. "He had someone fighting beside him." When the room returned to stillness, the pup let out a small hum, a soft vibration in his chest. Caleb leaned in closer, feeling the meaning of the sound long before he recognized it. The pup was trying to talk, in the only way his fragile body allowed. "I hear you," Caleb whispered. "I am right here." The little creature edged forward again, tiny nose nudging the air until he found what he was searching for. He settled near the warmth of Caleb's hand, breathing in a way that felt calmer, deeper, touched with a sense of safety that had not been there before. Minutes passed, then more. The pup's breathing grew smoother, no longer stretched thin between effort and exhaustion. His small chest rose with a steadiness that settled something deep within Caleb, something worn but still capable of hope. The veterinarian stepped back in, clipboard in hand. "If he keeps this up," he said, "he may be strong enough for a supervised feeding soon. It will be small, but it will tell us a lot." Caleb exhaled slowly, releasing a breath that felt like it had waited months to be let go. "He will take it," he said softly. "He is stronger than he looks." The pup stirred again, this time opening his eyes fully, just for a moment. The gaze was soft, unfocused, but undeniably present. Caleb froze, then smiled, the warmth reaching all the way to his voice. "There you are," he said. "Welcome back." The pup blinked once, then pressed his tiny muzzle toward Caleb's fingers, a gesture so deliberate, so full of meaning, that it felt like a bridge built between their two fragile worlds. The veterinarian paused at the doorway, watching the scene unfold with quiet reverence. "It is remarkable," he murmured. "Some bonds form before we even realize they have begun." Caleb kept his hand near, letting the pup rest against the warmth without pressure or expectation. "We are in this together now," he said softly. The puppy's breathing settled into a peaceful rhythm, each inhale a quiet affirmation of the life he had chosen to hold on to. And in the gentle glow of the clinic, wrapped in sunlight and steady faith, the fragile connection between a Marine and a tiny German Shepherd began to take root in a way neither of them could have planned, but both of them seemed to need. Evening settled gently over the small clinic, softening the edges of the room with a warm, amber glow. The rhythm of the day had quieted into something calm and steady, like the space itself was exhaling after holding its breath for hours. Caleb remained close to the table, his presence now woven into the little pup's world as naturally as the warmth of the lamp or the softness of the blanket. The puppy, still fragile but undeniably alive, nestled into the fold of the towel with a sense of comfort that had grown stronger with every passing minute. His breathing, once thin as thread, now carried a gentle cadence, rising and falling with a quiet promise. The veterinarian approached once more, studying the tiny form with a thoughtful gaze. "His strength is returning," he said softly. "Slowly, but with intention. That is the kind of recovery we hoped for." Caleb nodded, unable to keep the softness from his expression. "He chose to stay," he murmured. "He chose this fight." The veterinarian adjusted the lamp slightly and stepped back, leaving the two of them in a gentle hush. The puppy stirred at the shift in the air, lifting his head just enough to blink at the glow around him. His eyes held a faint clarity now, the early traces of awareness returning like a sunrise spreading across a quiet horizon. Caleb leaned closer, voice steady and warm. "You are getting stronger," he whispered. "One breath at a time." The pup's ears twitched at the sound, and he nudged forward with a tiny effort, nose brushing against Caleb's knuckle. The gesture, though small, felt full of meaning, an acknowledgement, a quiet bond forming in the space between them. Outside the window, the sky deepened into soft blues and purples, the first stars beginning to appear. The world seemed to settle into a gentle stillness, mirroring the fragile peace inside the room. Caleb rested his hand on the table, close enough for the pup to sense, far enough to allow the small creature to move freely. The puppy shifted again, curling into the warmth and letting out a soft hum of contentment, the kind of sound that only comes from feeling safe. The veterinarian watched for a moment longer before speaking quietly. "He will remember this," he said. "Not the clinic, not the tubes or the blankets. He will remember. The voice that stayed. The presence that waited." Caleb exhaled, the truth of those words settling deep within him. He had known loneliness in ways he never spoke about, the kind of silence that lingers long after the noise of duty fades. And now, here in this small room, a tiny life had reached for him with trust so pure it felt like a quiet gift. The pup opened his eyes again, this time holding the gaze a moment longer. His nose pressed gently toward Caleb's hand, not out of desperation, but out of recognition. "Connection." Caleb whispered, "I am here," letting the words carry the weight of a promise forming in his chest. The puppy let out a soft breath, settling against the blanket with a peaceful ease. In that warm circle of lamplight, as evening wrapped the clinic in a gentle calm, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile truth rising like a blessing. Neither of them had chosen the moment that brought them together. But both, in their own quiet ways, were choosing what came next. Night settled softly around the clinic, wrapping the small building in a calm that felt almost like a benediction. The warm lamplight continued to glow over the table where the tiny puppy rested, his breaths now steady enough to form a gentle cadence. Caleb remained beside him, his posture relaxed for the first time since he had walked through the door earlier that day. The veterinarian entered quietly, his voice low so as not to disturb the fragile peace. "He is past the hardest part," he said. "He will need care, but he is out of immediate danger." Caleb let the words settle into him in slow, grateful waves. "Thank you," he murmured. The veterinarian offered a quiet smile. "He responded to you. Not many animals cling that hard after a night like that. Whatever he heard in your voice, it kept him anchored." The man stepped back, leaving the room in a hush that felt almost sacred. The puppy stirred, lifting his head slightly. His eyes, though still soft and tired, held a calm clarity that had not been there before. He looked toward Caleb with a small, instinctive trust, as if recognizing the presence that had guided him through the longest night of his young life. Caleb lowered his hand to the edge of the blanket. The pup moved toward it, not with the desperation of survival, but with the gentle certainty of belonging. His tiny nose brushed Caleb's knuckle before he settled again, curling into the warmth with a quiet sigh. Outside, the first thin threads of moonlight wove across the frosted window, adding a faint glow to the room. The world beyond felt still, as if pausing to acknowledge the small miracle that had taken place within these walls. Caleb watched the pup rest, his chest rising and falling with a rhythm that felt both fragile and profoundly hopeful. For a moment, memories of long miles, distant missions, and the quiet ache of returning home without purpose flickered through him. But they softened as he looked at the small life beside him, the one who had reached for him with more trust than he had expected or deserved. "You made it," Caleb whispered, letting the truth settle in the air. "You really made it." The pup's ears twitched at the sound, recognizing the voice that had stayed through the hours when everything else seemed to fade. He shifted closer, resting his tiny head near Caleb's hand as if claiming the space as his own. Caleb felt something gentle unfold inside him, a warmth that moved through his chest with a sense of quiet grace. It was not loud, not dramatic. It was the soft realization that saving this small life had saved something in him too, something he had not known was still waiting to be touched. He brushed a finger against the edge of the towel, careful not to disturb the pup's rest. "We both got a second chance today," he whispered, his voice steady, filled with a gratitude that needed no explanation. The puppy breathed out a soft hum, barely audible but full of peace, as if agreeing in the only way he could. And in the warm circle of lamplight, under the quiet blessing of the night, two souls, one weary, one newly spared, rested together in a moment that felt as close to grace as anything Caleb had ever known.